The rain hammered against the windshield of my old scooter as I checked the delivery address one more time. Han Minso, that's me, 24 years old, Omega, and currently juggling 3 part-time jobs just to keep my grandmother's medical bills paid and food on our table. Just 2 more deliveries tonight, I muttered to myself, my breath forming small clouds in the cold evening air. The package in my insulated bag was already late, and I could feel my phone buzzing with increasingly impatient messages from my supervisor. I pulled up to an abandoned warehouse district, immediately feeling uneasy. This couldn't be right. The address led me to a dilapidated building surrounded by darkness, with only a few flickering streetlights casting eerie shadows across broken pavement. That's when I heard it, a woman's frightened cry. My instincts screamed at me to turn around, to call the police, to do anything but what I was about to do. But then I heard her voice again, trembling and afraid, and suddenly all I could think about was my own grandmother. What if that was her? What if she needed help and no one came? Before I could talk myself out of it, I was running toward the sound. Around the corner, I saw them. 5 men in dark clothes surrounding an elderly woman. She was small, dignified even in distress, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the terror in her eyes. One of the men held a gun pointed directly at her head. "Please," she was saying, her voice steady despite her fear. "Whatever my grandson has done to anger your organization, I had nothing to do with it." "Your grandson thinks he can encroach on our territory?" one of the gunmen snarled. "The great Kang Tae-hyun thinks he's untouchable? We'll see how untouchable he feels when we send him your body in pieces." My heart hammered in my chest. Kang Tae-hyun. Even I, who tried to stay as far away from the criminal underworld as possible, knew that name. The most ruthless mafia boss in Seoul, they said. A man who showed no mercy to his enemies. But all I saw was a grandmother who needed help. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking slightly. "Leave her alone." 5 pairs of eyes turned to me. I must have looked ridiculous, soaking wet, clutching a delivery bag, probably smelling like the fried chicken I'd delivered an hour ago. "Get lost, Omega," one of them sneered, and I felt the familiar sting of being dismissed because of my biology. "Unless you want to die with her." The old woman's eyes met mine, and in them I saw something that reminded me so much of my own grandmother, strength, wisdom, and in this moment, fear for someone else. She was afraid for me. "Run, young man," she said softly. "You don't need to be here." But I couldn't run. My grandmother had always told me that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was doing the right thing despite being terrified. And I was absolutely terrified. I said, "Leave her alone." I moved closer even as my legs trembled. The gunman's face twisted with anger. "Fine. You want to be a hero? Die like one." He turned the gun toward the old woman, and in that split second I saw his finger tighten on the trigger. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I threw myself forward, putting my body between the gun and the grandmother. The gunshot was deafeningly loud. I felt the impact like a sledgehammer to my shoulder, spinning me around. The pain was immediate and all-consuming, white-hot fire spreading through my chest. I hit the ground hard, my vision already starting to blur at the edges. Through the haze of pain, I heard more gunshots, different ones, rapid and precise. Screams. The sound of bodies hitting the ground. Then a voice, deep and commanding, filled with barely controlled rage. "Anyone who touches her dies." I tried to focus, tried to see who was speaking, but my vision was fading. I caught a glimpse of a tall figure, broad-shouldered and moving with deadly precision. More gunshots. More screams that were cut short. The last thing I heard before darkness claimed me was the old woman's voice, gentle and worried. "Tae-hyun, this young man saved my life. Please save his." I woke to the steady beep of medical equipment and the overwhelming scent of sanitizer and something else. A rich, woody scent that my Omega instincts immediately recognized as alpha pheromones, but unlike any I'd encountered before. These were powerful, controlled, and somehow comforting. My eyes fluttered open to find myself in what could only be described as a luxury hospital suite. The room was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Seoul skyline. The bed I was in felt like it cost more than my entire apartment. "He's awake." That was my grandmother's voice, and suddenly she was at my bedside, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Minsoya, my precious boy, you scared me half to death." "Grandma," I croaked, my throat dry. My shoulder throbbed with pain, but it was manageable. They must have me on some serious painkillers. "I'm okay." "What? What were you thinking?" She was crying and scolding me at the same time, which was very like her. "Throwing yourself in front of a bullet? You could have died. You're all I have in this world, you foolish, brave boy. You would have done the same." I managed a weak smile. "You taught me to help people who need it." Another voice spoke, and I turned my head to see the elderly woman from the warehouse sitting in a chair on the other side of my bed. She looked completely different now, elegant in an expensive hanbok, her eyes warm and kind. "He's right, you know," she said to my grandmother with a gentle smile. "You clearly raised a young man of exceptional character. Mrs. Han, your grandson saved my life." My grandmother wiped her eyes. "And your grandson saved his, Mrs. Kong. I don't know how we can ever repay you for the medical care." "There will be no talk of repayment," Mrs. Kong said firmly but kindly. "Your grandson took a bullet meant for me. He's a hero." The door to my room opened and I forgot how to breathe. The man who entered was perhaps the most beautiful. No, beautiful wasn't the right word, the most striking person I'd ever seen. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a powerful build evident even under his expensive black suit. His face was all sharp angles and intense features, with dark eyes that seemed to see through everything. His presence filled the room like a physical force, and every Omega instinct I had was suddenly screaming at me about the sheer power of the Alpha who had just walked in. This had to be Kang Tae-hyun. "Grandmother," he said, his voice deep and controlled, though I caught the underlying current of emotion. "You should rest. You've been here for 2 days straight." 2 days. I gasped. Mrs. Kong smiled at me. "You've been unconscious. The surgery was extensive. The bullet damaged your shoulder quite badly. But you're going to be fine, thanks to the best surgeons money can buy." Kang Tae-hyun's dark eyes fixed on me, and I felt pinned in place by the intensity of his gaze. He moved closer to my bed and I caught his scent again, cedar and something darker, more complex. My Omega hindbrain was practically purring, which was mortifying. "Han Min-so," he said, and hearing my name in that deep voice did strange things to my insides. "I owe you a debt that I can never fully repay. You saved the person most precious to me in this world." He bowed, actually bowed, to me, and I scrambled to sit up straighter despite the pain. "No, please, you don't need to," I stammered. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," he said firmly, straightening. "They wouldn't have. Most people would have run as they should have. You chose to be brave when you had every reason to be afraid. You could have died." "So could she," I said quietly. She reminded me of my grandmother. I couldn't just walk away. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise maybe, or something softer. He glanced at my grandmother, who was watching our exchange with interest. "I understand," he said slowly. "My grandmother raised me when no one else would. She took a child born into violence and darkness and taught him about honor, about loyalty, about—" He paused, "about what truly matters in life. I would burn this city to the ground if anything happened to her." The raw emotion in his voice startled me. This was supposed to be Seoul's most ruthless criminal, but the way he looked at his grandmother was filled with such genuine love and protectiveness. "My grandmother is the same for me," I found myself saying. "My parents died when I was young. She worked 3 jobs to raise me to make sure I could go to school. Everything I do is for her." Mrs. Kong made a small sound, and I looked over to see her eyes misty. She reached out and took my grandmother's hand, and somehow in that moment, I knew these two women were going to become friends. Kang Tae-hyun was still staring at me with an intensity that made my skin tingle. "You work multiple jobs?" he asked. I nodded, suddenly self-conscious. "Delivery driver, convenience store clerk, and I do freelance translation work. Whatever I can find. Medical bills are expensive and—" I stopped, realizing I was rambling to a literal mafia boss about my financial problems. But instead of looking bored or dismissive, he looked thoughtful, concerned. "Not anymore," he said firmly. "Your medical care is completely covered. All of it, including any ongoing treatment you need. Your grandmother's medical expenses are also covered from this day forward. And I'm arranging a job for you at one of my legitimate businesses, with a salary that will ensure you never have to work 3 jobs again." I blinked, stunned. I can't accept that. It's too much." His jaw tightened. "You took a bullet for my grandmother. This is nothing compared to what I owe you." "But I didn't do it for a reward," I protested. "I know," he said, and his voice had gone softer. "That's exactly why you deserve it." Over the next week of my recovery, my life became surreal. The hospital suite had a constant stream of visitors, not just my grandmother and Mrs. Kong, but nurses who seemed to anticipate my every need, physical therapists who worked with me gently but effectively, and occasionally Kang Tae-hyun himself. He would visit in the evenings, usually after my grandmother had gone home for the night. At first, his visits were brief and formal, checking on my progress, ensuring I had everything I needed. But gradually they became longer. We began to talk. "Tell me about your translation work," he said one evening, settling into the chair beside my bed. He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his shirt sleeves, and I tried very hard not to notice how attractive he looked like that. It's mostly technical documents, I explained. Boring stuff really. Contracts, user manuals, that sort of thing. But I enjoy it. I like languages, the way meaning can shift depending on how you phrase something. You must be fluent in several languages. Korean, English, Japanese, and I'm working on my Mandarin, I said, then added with a self-deprecating smile. Turns out being an Omega with no family connections means you need every advantage you can get in the job market. His expression darkened. You've faced discrimination. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Of course. Omegas always do. People assume we're weak, emotional, that we can't handle pressure. Some employers won't even interview us. I shrugged, trying to seem unbothered even though it still stung. But my grandmother taught me to prove them wrong through my work. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She is, I said warmly. She's the strongest person I know. When my parents died, she was already in her 60s, but she took me in without hesitation. Worked herself to exhaustion to give me a good life. I owe her everything. I understand that feeling, Taehyun said quietly. My parents were not good people. They saw me as a weapon to be sharpened, a tool for the family business. My grandmother was the only one who saw me as a person. She's the reason I have any humanity left. I looked at him carefully. In the soft lighting of the hospital room, he seemed less like a terrifying crime lord and more like a man carrying a heavy burden. Is that why you stayed in the business? I asked softly. To protect her? He was quiet for a long moment. Partly. But also because by the time I was old enough to choose, I was already too deep. The things I've done. He shook his head. There's no walking away from that. But I've tried to make rules for myself. I don't traffic in drugs or people. I don't target innocents. I know that doesn't make me good, but you're trying to be honorable in a dishonorable world, I finished. His eyes met mine, and there was something vulnerable in them that made my heart clench. Something like that. We talked long into the night, about books, about philosophy, about our grandmother's increasingly obvious plot to become best friends. I learned that Taehyun loved classical music, that he'd never finished high school because he'd been pulled into the family business, that he sometimes wondered what kind of person he might have been if he'd been born into a different life. And I told him things I'd never told anyone, how lonely I sometimes felt, how scared I was of failing my grandmother, how I sometimes dreamed of a different life but felt guilty for wanting more when she'd sacrificed so much. There's nothing wrong with wanting more, he said firmly. Your grandmother would want you to be happy, to have the life you deserve. What about you? I asked. What do you want? He looked at me for a long moment and something in his gaze made my breath catch. I'm still figuring that out. By the second week, my grandmother and Mrs. Kong were practically inseparable. They would sit in my hospital room for hours, chatting away about everything from recipes to their favorite television dramas. Watching them together made my heart warm. Your grandmother has excellent taste, Mrs. Kong declared one afternoon. She agrees with me that the female lead in Autumn in My Heart was far too good for that wishy-washy male lead. My grandmother nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. He wasted her time for 20 episodes. I couldn't help but laugh, which made my shoulder twinge, but I didn't care. Seeing my grandmother so happy, with a friend her own age, was worth any amount of pain. Taehyun arrived during one of these sessions, and I watched his expression soften as he saw his grandmother laughing with mine. I haven't seen her this happy in years, he said quietly to me while our grandmothers were engaged in an animated discussion about kimchi recipes. Mine either, I admitted. She's been so worried about me, about money, about everything. It's nice to see her just enjoying herself. Your grandmother mentioned she lives in a small apartment in Guro district, he said casually. The building is old and she said the heating barely works. I tensed. We make do. It's affordable and... What if I told you I own a building in Mapo district? He interrupted gently. Clean, modern, excellent heating and security. There's a unit available on the 3rd floor. Perfect size for 2 people. The rent would be considerably lower than what you're paying now. Taehyun. Before you protest, he continued, consider that this would make me feel better. Knowing that the person who saved my grandmother's life and his own grandmother are living somewhere safe and comfortable. Is that really so unreasonable? When he put it like that. You're very manipulative, I said, but I was smiling. I'm a mafia boss, he replied with the faintest hint of humor in his voice. It's in the job description. I was discharged 3 weeks after the shooting, my arm in a sling but healing well. True to his word, Taehyun had arranged everything. The apartment in Mapo district was beautiful, far nicer than anywhere I'd ever lived. 2 bedrooms, a modern kitchen, actual heating that worked. My grandmother had cried when she first saw it. He'd also arranged a position for me at one of his legitimate businesses, an import-export company that desperately needed translators. The salary was more than I'd made at all 3 of my previous jobs combined. "This is too much," I'd protested weakly when he'd shown me the contract. "It's fair pay for your skills," he'd replied. "And you'll actually be working. I'm not giving you charity, Hanminso. I'm giving you an opportunity." That made it easier to accept, though I still felt overwhelmed by his generosity. What I didn't expect was how often I'd see him. He'd stop by the apartment to check on us, usually bringing expensive fruit or other gifts for our grandmothers, who would immediately usher him inside for tea. His presence in our small apartment should have felt intrusive, but instead it felt right, natural. I'd catch him watching me sometimes when he thought I wasn't looking. And I knew I watched him too, the way he moved, the rare smiles he gave his grandmother, the careful gentleness in his actions despite the dangerous power he carried. "He likes you, you know," my grandmother said one evening after Taehyun had left. We were washing dishes together, a comfortable domestic rhythm we'd fallen into in our new home. "Grandma," I protested, feeling my face heat. "Don't grandma me," she said, but she was smiling. "I see how he looks at you. Like you're something precious. And I see how you look at him too, Minsoya." "He's a mafia boss," I said weakly. "He's a good man who had a hard life," she corrected. "Just like you're a good man who's had a hard life. Mrs. Kong and I have been talking." "Of course you have," I muttered. "And we both think you two would be perfect for each other. An Omega who needs someone strong enough to appreciate his courage, and an Alpha who needs someone gentle enough to see his heart." I couldn't argue with her logic, mainly because I was starting to think she might be right. The shift in our relationship happened gradually, then all at once. It started with dinner. Taehyun invited me to a restaurant. Just the 2 of us, he specified, though our grandmothers were practically giddy about it. "It's not a date," I told my reflection as I got ready, trying on 3 different outfits before settling on simple black pants and a soft blue sweater that my grandmother said brought out my eyes. "Keep telling yourself that," she called from the living room, laughter in her voice. The restaurant was intimate, expensive, and private. Taehyun was waiting when I arrived, and the look in his eyes when he saw me made my Omega instincts sit up and take notice. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and I felt heat creep up my neck. "Thank you. You look good too." He looked devastating in a dark suit with no tie, the top button of his shirt undone, but I wasn't about to tell him that. Dinner was incredible, course after course of expertly prepared food, but I barely tasted it. I was too aware of Taehyun across the table, the way he listened intently to everything I said, the way his leg would occasionally brush against mine under the table. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said as dessert arrived. I nodded, suddenly nervous. "Have you ever been in a relationship? With an alpha?" I shook my head. "No. I never had time with work and taking care of my grandmother. And most alphas." I trailed off. "Most alphas what?" "They either wanted an Omega they could control, or they were looking for someone from a good family who could advance their career. I'm neither of those things." His hand reached across the table, covering mine. The touch sent electricity through me. "You're better than any of those things. You're brave, kind, intelligent, hardworking. Any alpha would be lucky to have you. What about you?" I asked, barely breathing. "What kind of Omega are you looking for?" His thumb traced circles on the back of my hand, and the gesture was so intimate it made me shiver. I've never looked before. My life, my business. I didn't think I had room for a relationship. I didn't think I deserved one. He paused, his dark eyes intense. "And then you threw yourself in front of a bullet to save my grandmother, and I couldn't stop thinking about you. About how brave you were. How selfless. How despite everything you've been through, you've remained kind and gentle." "Taehyun. I'm not a good man, Minso," he continued, his voice rough. "I've done things that would horrify you. I've hurt people, killed people. My world is violent and dark. But when I'm with you, when I see you with our grandmothers, when you smile at me like I'm just a person and not a monster, I want to be better. I want to be the kind of man who might deserve someone like you." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "You are that man," I said softly. "You've been nothing but kind and protective to me and my grandmother. You love your grandmother so deeply. You've helped me when you didn't have to. Yes, you've done bad things, but you're trying to be better. That matters." His grip on my hand tightened. "If I asked to court you properly, would you say yes?" I smiled, feeling something bloom warm and hopeful in my chest. "Yes." The next few months were the happiest of my life. Taehyun courted me with an old-fashioned attentiveness that made my grandmother approve wholeheartedly. He'd pick me up from work, bring me coffee, send me texts throughout the day just to check in. He was careful with me, respectful, never pushing for more than I was ready to give. But the tension between us was building. Every touch lingered a little longer. Every kiss, and we'd progress to kissing deep, breathless kisses that left me weak-kneed, left us both wanting more. Our grandmothers, meanwhile, were already planning our wedding. "I'm thinking spring," Mrs. Kong said one evening when all four of us were having dinner together. "The cherry blossoms would be beautiful." "We haven't even," I started to protest. "Summer," my grandmother countered. "Not too hot, not too cold. Perfect weather for outdoor photos." Taehyun caught my eye across the table and smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. I smiled back helplessly. "We should probably actually get engaged before planning the wedding," he said mildly. "Details?" Mrs. Kong waved her hand dismissively. "We know how this story ends. Two people clearly in love, two grandmothers who are already best friends. It's fate." She wasn't wrong about us being in love. I'd fallen for Taehyun completely, for his rare smiles, his protective nature, the way he was so careful with me. The way he'd sit with my grandmother and patiently listen to her stories. The way his eyes would soften when he looked at me. And I was pretty sure he'd fallen for me too, based on the way he'd hold me like I was something precious, the way his scent would spike with want whenever we kissed, the barely controlled desire I could see in his eyes. It was one such evening after dinner with our grandmothers, that everything changed. Taehyun had driven me home, walking me to my door as he always did. "Come in for a bit?" I asked and he nodded. My grandmother was staying overnight at Mrs. Kang's house. They'd been doing that more often lately, giving us privacy. The apartment was quiet as we entered. "Do you want something to drink?" I asked, suddenly nervous. "Minso," he said softly, catching my hand. "Look at me." I turned to face him, and the intensity in his eyes took my breath away. "I love you," he said simply. "I've been trying to find the right moment to tell you, some romantic setting, but I can't wait anymore. I love you. I love your kindness, your courage, your laugh. I love how you care for your grandmother. I love how you see past what I am to who I am. I love you and I want you to be mine." Tears pricked my eyes. "I love you too. I have for weeks now, but I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "That this was too good to be true. That you'd realize I'm just." He kissed me, cutting off my words. It was different from our other kisses, deeper, more demanding. His hands cupped my face, then slid into my hair, and I melted against him. "You're not just anything," he said against my lips. "You're everything." "Taehyun," I breathed, and his name came out like a plea. "Tell me to stop," he said roughly, his forehead pressed against mine. "Tell me to slow down and I will." "Don't stop," I whispered. "Please don't stop." What happened next was a blur of sensation. Somehow we made it to my bedroom, leaving a trail of clothes behind us. His hands were everywhere, careful but possessive, mapping every inch of my skin like he was memorizing me. "You're so beautiful," he murmured against my neck, his kisses trailing fire down my throat. "So perfect." I'd never been with anyone before, and he was patient, worshipping my body with his hands and mouth until I was trembling and desperate. When he finally pressed inside me, I gasped at the intensity of it, the stretch, the fullness, the overwhelming rightness of being connected to him this way. "Okay?" he asked, his voice strained with the effort of holding still. "More than okay," I managed. "Perfect." He moved then, slow and deep, and I lost myself in the sensation. His scent surrounded me, cedar and musk and something uniquely him. My omega instincts were singing, recognizing this alpha as mine, as perfect for me. We moved together, finding a rhythm that was both tender and intense. He whispered my name like a prayer, told me over and over how beautiful I was, how perfect, how much he loved me. And when we finally fell over the edge together, it felt like coming home. Afterwards, we lay tangled together, my head on his chest as his fingers traced lazy patterns on my back. "Move in with me," he said quietly. I lifted my head to look at him. "What?" "Move in with me. You and your grandmother. I have a house. It's big enough for all of us. Our grandmothers would love it. And I." He paused, his hand coming up to cup my cheek. "I want to wake up with you every morning. I want to come home to you every night. I want us to build a life together." "That's a big step," I said, but I was smiling. "I know. And if you need time." "Yes," I interrupted. "My answer is yes." His smile was brilliant and he kissed me again, sweet and deep. "I'm going to make you so happy, Minso. I promise." "You already do," I whispered against his lips. Moving into Taehyun's house was an adventure. The place was enormous, a traditional hanok that had been modernized, with a beautiful garden that made my grandmother exclaim with delight. Finally, space for a proper vegetable garden, she declared, and Mrs. Kong immediately began planning what they would plant. Life settled into a new rhythm. I continued working at the import-export company, surprising myself with how much I enjoyed the work. Taehyun would drop me off in the morning and pick me up in the evening, and despite his dangerous business, he made sure to keep that part of his life separate from our home. Our home. I still marveled at how natural that felt. Our grandmothers were in heaven, having each other for company all day while we worked. They'd taken over the kitchen, filling the house with the smells of home-cooked meals. They'd also taken to dropping increasingly unsubtle hints about their desire for great-grandchildren. Mrs. Park down the street just became a great-grandmother, my grandmother mentioned one evening at dinner. Twin boys. She brings them to the park every day, they're adorable. Very adorable, Mrs. Kong agreed. Of course she's the same age as us. Imagine being able to hold your great-grandchildren while you're still healthy enough to chase them around. Taehyun caught my eye across the table, his lips twitching with suppressed amusement. Grandmother, he said mildly, we've only been living together for 2 months. Which is plenty of time to get started, she replied primly. I'm not getting any younger, you know. Neither am I, my grandmother added. And Minso would be such a wonderful parent. He practically raised himself after his parents died, you know, such a responsible boy. I felt my face heat. Grandma. But secretly I'd been thinking about it too. About what it would be like to have a family with Taehyun, to give our grandmothers the great-grandchildren they so desperately wanted. That night as we lay in bed together, Taehyun pulled me close. They're relentless, he murmured into my hair. They really are, I agreed. I'm sorry about. Don't be sorry. He pulled back to look at me. Is it something you want? Eventually. My heart fluttered. Is it something you want? With you? Yes. His hand came to rest on my stomach, warm and possessive. I want everything with you, Minso. A future, a family, all of it. I kissed him, pouring all my love into it. I want that too. 3 months later I started feeling strange. Nauseous in the mornings, exhausted by afternoon, more sensitive to scents than usual. It took me an embarrassingly long time to connect the dots. When I finally took the test, staring at the positive result, I felt a rush of emotions, joy, fear, excitement, nervousness, all tangled together. I told our grandmothers first, unable to keep it to myself. Their reaction was explosive. Finally, Mrs. Kong actually jumped up from her seat. Do you hear that? She called toward the garden where my grandmother was. We're going to be great-grandmothers. My grandmother rushed inside, took one look at my face and burst into happy tears. Oh, my precious boy. You're going to be such a wonderful father. We need to tell Taehyun, I said, laughing through my own tears. Yes, but first, Mrs. Kong was already on her phone. I'm calling Dr. Lee. We need to make sure you have the best prenatal care. And we need to start preparing a nursery. Oh, and vitamins. You need proper omega pregnancy vitamins. Grandmother, breathe, I said, amused and touched by her enthusiasm. That evening when Taehyun came home, I met him at the door. He took one look at my face and his expression shifted to concern. What's wrong? Are you okay? I'm fine, I said quickly. Better than fine. I have news. I pulled the test from my pocket and handed it to him. Watched as his eyes widened as he stared at it, then at me, then at the test again. You're pregnant, I confirmed, nervous about his reaction. He dropped the test, pulled me into his arms and kissed me breathless. When he finally pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. I love you, he said roughly. God, Minso, I love you so much. You've given me everything, a home, a family, a reason to be better. And now this. Are you happy? I asked, needing to hear it. Happy doesn't begin to cover it, he said, then dropped to his knees in front of me. His hands came to rest gently on my stomach. Hello, little one, he said softly. I'm your father. And I promise I'm going to do everything I can to give you the life you deserve. To keep you and your papa safe and loved always. I ran my fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with emotion. This man, this fierce, protective alpha who the world saw as ruthless and dangerous, was on his knees in front of me, making promises to our unborn child. We're going to be okay, I said softly. He looked up at me and his smile was pure joy. Better than okay. We're going to be perfect. The next several months were a whirlwind. If I thought our grandmothers had been enthusiastic before, it was nothing compared to their behavior once they knew I was pregnant. They transformed one of the spare rooms into a nursery, arguing cheerfully about color schemes and furniture. They attended every doctor's appointment with us, took copious notes and made sure I ate enough, rested enough, took my vitamins. Basically, they hovered like I was made of glass. I'm not going to break, I protested one afternoon when my grandmother insisted I sit down after I'd been standing for all of 5 minutes. Humor us, Mrs. Kong said, appearing with yet another snack. We've waited so long for this. Let us enjoy it. Taehyun was even worse. He'd always been protective, but now he was hypervigilant. He'd rearranged his business dealings to be home more, installed a state-of-the-art security system, and had a doctor on call 24/7. I'm going to work, I'd insist most mornings. You don't have to, he'd reply, which had become his standard response. You could rest. I want to work. I'm pregnant, not incapacitated. Besides, it's good for me to stay active. He'd eventually relent, but not without making me promise to call him if I felt even slightly unwell, and ensuring my office was stocked with everything I might need. The pregnancy itself was mostly smooth, though the morning sickness was brutal for the first few months. Taehyun would hold my hair back, rub my back, and never once complain about being woken up at dawn by my mad dash to the bathroom. I love you, I'd say miserably after one particularly bad morning. I love you too, he'd reply, helping me brush my teeth. Even when you're vomiting at 6 a.m. At the 3-month ultrasound we got a surprise. Congratulations, Dr. Lee said, smiling at the screen. You're having twins. I stared at the monitor, at the 2 tiny forms visible there, and felt tears start to flow. Taehyun's hand tightened on mine. Twins, he breathed, sounding odd. We're having twins. 2 great grandbabies. Mrs. Kong exclaimed from where she and my grandmother had insisted on being present for the ultrasound. This is the best day of my life. Our grandmothers were beyond ecstatic. They immediately doubled their nursery preparations, talking about how they'd each be able to hold a baby at the same time. As my pregnancy progressed and my belly grew, Taehyun became increasingly tender. He'd talk to my stomach every night, telling our sons, we'd learned at the 5-month scan that we were having boys, about his day, about how much he loved them, about all the things he wanted to teach them. I'm going to do better than my parents did, he'd say, his hand warm on my swollen belly. I'm going to make sure you know every day that you're loved, that you're safe, that you can be whoever you want to be. You're going to be an amazing father, I'd tell him, running my fingers through his hair. I have a good example to follow, he'd reply, kissing my stomach gently. Your papa is the best person I know. The nursery came together beautifully, soft blues and whites, 2 cribs positioned so the twins could see each other, everything they could possibly need. Our grandmothers had knitted what seemed like hundreds of tiny clothes, blankets, and booties. By month 7, I was huge and uncomfortable. My back ached constantly, I couldn't sleep properly, and I felt like I was perpetually out of breath. How are there still 2 more months of this? I groaned one evening, trying to find a comfortable position on the couch. Taehyun immediately moved to sit behind me, his strong hands kneading my lower back. Because our sons are making sure we know how strong and brave their papa is, he said, kissing my shoulder. Despite the discomfort, I was happy. Happier than I'd ever been. Watching our family come together, seeing my grandmother and Mrs. Kong bicker affectionately over baby names, feeling Taehyun's joy every time the babies kicked, knowing that soon our home would be filled with new life, it was everything I'd never dared to dream of. 2 weeks before my due date, I woke up in the middle of the night to a warm wetness and a dull ache in my lower back. Taehyun, I shook him awake. I think my water broke. He was up instantly, alert and focused. Are you having contractions? I don't know, maybe? My back hurts and I gasped as a wave of pain hit me. Yes, definitely contractions. What followed was controlled chaos. Taehyun called the doctor while simultaneously getting me dressed and alerting our grandmothers. By the time we made it to the car, both grandmothers were already downstairs, overnight bags packed and ready to go. The hospital had prepared a private wing for us, and within minutes of arrival, I was hooked up to monitors and being examined by Dr. Lee. You're progressing quickly, she said. These babies are ready to meet the world. The next several hours were a blur of pain and effort. Taehyun never left my side, letting me squeeze his hand hard enough to bruise, whispering encouragement, telling me how strong I was, how proud he was of me. I can't, I sobbed at one point, exhausted and overwhelmed. You can, he said firmly, pressing his forehead to mine. You're the bravest person I know, Minso. You took a bullet for my grandmother. You can do this. And somehow I did. At 3:47 a.m. our first son was born, his cry strong and indignant. They placed him on my chest and I stared in wonder at his tiny, perfect face. He's beautiful, Taehyun whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He looks just like you. 12 minutes later his brother followed, smaller but just as vocal. Holding both of them, feeling Taehyun's arms around all 3 of us, I couldn't stop crying. We did it, I said. You did it, he corrected, kissing my temple. You're incredible. Our grandmothers were let in shortly after, and their reaction was everything we could have hoped for. They cried, they cooed, they each held a baby and looked at them like they were the most precious things in the world. "They're perfect," my grandmother said, tears streaming down her face. "Absolutely perfect." "They have Taehyun's nose," Mrs. Kang observed, "and Minso's eyes. The best of both of you." We named them Taejun and Minjae, names that our grandmothers had finally agreed on after weeks of debate. Taejun, the firstborn, was calm and observant, while Minjae was more demanding and expressive. They were perfect in completely different ways. The first few weeks were exhausting. Twin babies meant double the feedings, double the diaper changes, double the crying. But it also meant double the joy, double the love. And we had help. So much help. Our grandmothers had moved into full great-grandmother mode, taking turns with night feedings, rocking fussy babies, giving Taehyun and me precious hours of sleep. "Go rest," Mrs. Kang would order, shooing us toward our bedroom. "Your grandmother and I have this under control." And they did. They were naturals with the babies, and watching them with our sons, seeing the pure love and joy on their faces, made everything worth it. Taehyun was an amazing father. Despite his dangerous business, despite his reputation, he was gentle and patient with our sons. He'd hold them for hours, talking to them softly, singing lullabies in his deep voice that made them settle immediately. "You're magic with them," I said one night, watching him expertly soothe both babies at once. "They're my world," he said simply. "You and them, our grandmothers, you're all my world. Everything else is just noise." The twins were 6 months old, and our house was in a state of joyful chaos. Baby toys were scattered everywhere, the smell of formula and baby powder had become permanent, and sleep was still a precious commodity. But I'd never been happier. Taejun had started rolling over, much to everyone's excitement, while Minjae had discovered his voice and used it enthusiastically. Our grandmothers were completely besotted, spending most of their time doting on the babies. "Mrs. Park's great-grandchildren have nothing on ours," my grandmother declared proudly one afternoon at the park, where we'd taken the twins for some fresh air. "Look how alert they are. So intelligent, just like their papa. And strong like their father," Mrs. Kang added, watching Taehyun easily carry both babies in his arms. Perfect boys. The park had become our regular afternoon destination. Our grandmothers would sit on a bench, cooing at the twins, while Taehyun and I would take turns pushing the double stroller. It was normal, domestic, everything I'd never thought I could have. "Who would have thought," I said one afternoon as we walked together, "that the day I went to deliver food to that warehouse would lead to all this?" Taehyun's arm came around my waist, pulling me close. "I think about that day all the time. How brave you were. How one moment of courage changed everything. For both of us," I said, leaning into him. "For all of us," he corrected, nodding toward our grandmothers, who were now singing to the babies in slightly off-key harmony. "We're a family now. A real family." That night, after the twins were finally asleep and our grandmothers had retired to their rooms, Taehyun and I had a rare moment of privacy. "Come here," he said, pulling me onto the bed beside him. "I feel like I haven't properly held you in weeks." "That's because you're always holding our sons," I teased, but I curled against him gratefully. "Not that I'm complaining. You're an incredible father." "I'm trying to be," he said. "I want them to have everything I didn't: safety, love, the freedom to choose their own paths." "They will," I assured him. "We'll make sure of it." He was quiet for a moment, his hand tracing patterns on my back. "I've been thinking about retiring." I pulled back to look at him. "From the business?" He nodded. "I have enough money saved. The legitimate businesses are doing well. And He paused. "I don't want my sons to grow up with a father in constant danger. I don't want them to be ashamed of what I do, or worse, think it's normal. I want to be better for them. For you." My heart swelled. "You're already better. You've always been better than you think you are." "Maybe," he said. "But I want to be certain. I want to be there for every moment. First steps, first words, first days of school. I want to be the father I never had." "Then do it," I said firmly. "Retire. We'll figure everything else out together." He kissed me then, slow and deep, and I felt the familiar heat building between us. It had been months since we'd been intimate. Pregnancy, birth, and then caring for newborn twins had taken priority. But now, "I've missed this," he murmured against my lips. "Missed being able to touch you, hold you like this." "The doctor cleared me weeks ago," I reminded him, my hands sliding under his shirt. "And our grandmothers have the baby monitor. We have time." That was all the encouragement he needed. We came together with a tenderness born of deep love and trust, relearning each other's bodies, remembering what it felt like to be just us. Not parents, not sons, just two people who loved each other desperately. Afterwards, wrapped in his arms, I felt completely at peace. I love you, I whispered. I love you too, he replied. More than I ever thought I could love anyone. You saved my grandmother, and in doing so, you saved me. 1 year after the twins were born, we held a celebration. Not just for their birthday but for everything, for family, for love, for second chances. The house was full of people, friends from work, a few of Taehyun's trusted associates, neighbors who'd become friends. But the center of attention were Taejun and Minjae, who were now walking, stumbling really, and getting into everything with the boundless energy of toddlers. Our grandmothers were in their element, showing off the twins to anyone who would listen, telling elaborate stories about their brilliance and charm. Did you see how Taejun stacked those blocks? My grandmother said to Mrs. Park, who'd been invited with her own great-grandchildren. 5 blocks high. He's going to be an engineer. And Minjae sang along with the birthday song. Mrs. Kong added. Perfect pitch, just like his father. I caught Taehyun's eye across the room and we shared a smile. Our grandmother's competitive great-grandmother behavior had become a running joke between us. Later, after the guests had left and the twins were finally asleep, the 4 of us sat in the living room, exhausted but happy. I have an announcement, Taehyun said, and something in his tone made everyone pay attention. I've officially retired from all my unofficial business dealings. Everything is legitimate now. I'm just a businessman. My grandmother clasped her hands together. Oh Taehyun, that's wonderful news. It's the right thing, Mrs. Kong said, and I could see she was proud of her grandson. You have a family now. They need you safe and present. I couldn't have done it without Minso, Taehyun said, reaching for my hand. He showed me what was possible. What I could be if I chose differently. You showed yourself, I said softly. I just reminded you. Well, my grandmother said, standing up with a mischievous smile, since we're making announcements, Mrs. Kong and I have been talking. We're planning a trip. A trip. I repeated. To Jeju Island, Mrs. Kong explained. For 2 weeks. We've never had a proper vacation and we think now that the boys are more settled, it's the perfect time. We'll leave you 2 with the twins, my grandmother added. Give you some quality family time without us hovering. I looked at them suspiciously. You're matchmaking again, aren't you? We don't need to matchmake, Mrs. Kong said primly. You're already married, we'd had a quiet ceremony 6 months earlier, and you've given us beautiful great-grandsons. We're simply taking a well-deserved vacation. But I saw the way they looked at each other, the small smiles. They were definitely planning something. After our grandmothers had gone to bed, Taehyun and I did a final check on the twins. They were sleeping peacefully in their cribs, Taejun with his thumb in his mouth, Minjae sprawled out like a starfish. They're growing so fast, I whispered. Too fast, Taehyun agreed, his arm coming around my waist. Soon they'll be running around, getting into trouble. Like their father? He smiled. Hopefully less trouble than their father got into. We stood there for a while just watching our sons sleep, marveling at the miracle of them. Do you ever think about that night? I asked quietly. The warehouse. Every day, he said. It was the worst and best night of my life. Worst because my grandmother was in danger. Best because it brought you into my life. I never imagined, I said, when I threw myself in front of that bullet, that it would lead to all this. To you, to our family, to this life. Fate, he said simply. It had to be fate. Nothing else explains how one moment of courage could create something so perfect. I turned in his arms, looking up at him. This man who'd been labeled a monster, who the world feared, who looked at me and our sons like we were the most precious things in existence. I love you, I said. Thank you for giving me this life. This family. Thank you for saving my grandmother, he replied. For being brave when you were terrified. For seeing past what I was to who I could be. For loving me despite everything. Not despite everything, I corrected. Because of everything. Because of who you are, protective, loyal, loving. You're a good man, Kang Taehyun. You always have been. He kissed me then, soft and sweet, and in that moment I felt the absolute rightness of everything. The journey we'd taken, the family we'd built, the love we'd found. From tragedy and violence had come something beautiful. From one moment of courage had come a lifetime of love. As we stood there in our son's nursery holding each other, I thought about that scared Omega who'd thrown himself in front of a bullet to save a stranger. I thought about the ruthless Alpha who'd found redemption in that act of selfless bravery. And I thought about our future, about watching our sons grow, about growing old with Taehyun, about the love that would see us through whatever challenges lay ahead. Ready for bed? Taehyun asked softly. Always, I replied, as long as it's with you. We left the nursery hand in hand, the baby monitor clipped to Taehyun's belt, Our grandmothers asleep in their rooms, our sons dreaming peacefully. Our family. Our home. Our life. Perfect. 5 years later, I stood in our garden, watching Taehyun chase our now 6-year-old twins around while our grandmothers sat on the porch, laughing at the chaos. Taejun had indeed become interested in building things, currently obsessed with constructing elaborate block towers. Min-jae was the performer of the family, always singing and dancing, his personality as vibrant as his brother's was thoughtful. "Papa." Min-jae called, running toward me. "Watch this." He proceeded to do what I think was supposed to be a cartwheel but was really more of a sideways roll. "Beautiful," I said seriously, and he beamed at me. "My turn." Taejun tugged on my hand. "Papa, I made you something." He pulled me toward his latest creation, a lopsided tower of blocks that was somehow still standing. "It's perfect," I told him, kissing the top of his head. "Just like our family," Taehyun said, coming up behind me and wrapping his arms around my waist. I leaned back against him, watching our sons play, our grandmothers chatting happily, the home we'd built together. "Yes," I agreed. "Just like our family. Perfect in every imperfect way. Built on courage, sustained by love, blessed with the joy of second chances. And I wouldn't change a single thing." The house was finally quiet. After tucking the twins into bed, a process that had taken nearly an hour of stories, water requests, and just one more hug, "Papa," I stood in the doorway of their room, watching their peaceful sleeping faces. Taejun had his arm thrown over his brother, protective even in sleep, while Min-jae was already starting to kick off his blankets. I smiled, adjusting Min-jae's covers one more time before quietly closing the door. Our grandmothers had already retired for the night, tired from a full day of spoiling their great-grandsons at the park. The house felt different in these rare moments of complete silence, intimate, like it was holding its breath just for us. I found Taehyun in our bedroom, fresh from the shower, wearing only loose sleep pants that hung low on his hips. Water still glistened on his skin, droplets sliding down the defined muscles of his chest and abdomen. After 5 years together, the sight of him still made my breath catch. He looked up as I entered, and something heated flared in his dark eyes as they traveled over me. "They're asleep?" His voice was already lower, rougher. "Finally," I said, closing and locking the door behind me, a necessary precaution with 2 curious 6-year-olds in the house. "I think we wore them out at the park." "Good." He moved toward me with that predatory grace he'd never quite lost, despite leaving his dangerous life behind. "Because I've been wanting you all day." My Omega instincts sparked to life immediately, my body responding to the desire in his scent, that cedar and musk that had become synonymous with home and safety and love. "Have you?" I tried to sound teasing, but my voice came out breathier than intended. He reached me, his hands settling on my hips, pulling me flush against him. "Watching you with our sons, being such a perfect papa. Do you know how attractive that is? How much I love seeing you like that." His lips found my neck, placing hot, open-mouthed kisses along my pulse point. I tilted my head automatically, giving him better access, my hands coming up to grip his broad shoulders. "Taehyun," I breathed as his teeth grazed that sensitive spot just below my ear. "I love when you say my name like that," he murmured against my skin. "Like you need me." "I do need you," I admitted, my fingers sliding into his still damp hair. "Always." He pulled back to look at me, his expression intense. Even after all these years, the way he looked at me, like I was something precious and desired and deeply loved, never failed to make my heart race. "I love you," he said, his hand coming up to cup my face. "Every single day I fall more in love with you. The life you've given me, the family we've built." I kissed him, cutting off his words. "We could talk later. Right now, I needed to feel him, to be close to him in the way that only we could be." He responded immediately, the kiss deepening, becoming hungry and demanding. His tongue swept into my mouth as his hands slid under my shirt, warm palms sliding over my skin. I gasped against his lips as his fingers traced patterns up my spine, knowing exactly where to touch to make me shiver. "Too many clothes," he growled and began working my shirt up and over my head. I helped, suddenly desperate to feel skin against skin. Once my shirt was gone, his hands were everywhere, tracing my ribs, thumbs brushing over my nipples, making me arch into his touch. My body remembered his touch intimately, responded to it eagerly even after years together. "Beautiful," he murmured, his eyes dark with desire as they roamed over me. "You're so beautiful, Minso." I felt heat creep up my neck. "I'm not." "You are," he insisted firmly, walking me backward toward the bed. "Beautiful and strong and perfect. Mine." The possessiveness in his voice sent a thrill through me. "Yours?" I agreed breathlessly. The back of my knees hit the bed and I sat looking up at him. He stood over me for a moment, just looking, and I could see the barely restrained desire in every line of his body. "Lie back," he commanded softly, and I did, watching as he hooked his fingers into my waistband and slowly pulled my pants and underwear down, exposing me completely to his gaze. The hunger in his eyes made me tremble. He knelt between my legs, his large hands sliding up my thighs, and I couldn't suppress a small sound of anticipation. "I'm going to take my time with you," he said, his voice a low rumble that I felt in my bones. "Make you feel so good, my Omega? Would you like that?" "Yes," I managed, already trembling. "Please, Taehyun." He leaned down, pressing kisses along my inner thigh, each one sending sparks of pleasure through me. His hands were firm on my hips, holding me in place as he worked his way higher, deliberately avoiding where I needed him most. "Taehyun," I whimpered, and he chuckled against my skin. "Patience, love." But then his mouth was on me and I cried out, my back arching off the bed. His tongue was wickedly skilled, knowing exactly how to drive me crazy, alternating between gentle and intense until I was gasping and writhing beneath him. "Perfect," he murmured between kisses. "You taste perfect. Sound perfect. So responsive for me." His fingers joined his mouth, sliding inside me with practiced ease, and I moaned at the sensation, the stretch, the fullness, the careful preparation. He'd always been so careful with me, so attentive to my pleasure. "More?" I gasped, one hand fisting in his hair. "I need more, I need you." He added another finger, working me open, his mouth still driving me toward the edge. I could feel my release building, pleasure coiling tight in my belly. "Not yet," he said, pulling back just as I was about to tip over. I made a sound of protest that made him smile wickedly. "I want to be inside you when you come." He stood, finally removing his pants, and I admired the sight of him. All-powerful muscle and masculine beauty, his arousal evident. 5 years and 2 children later, I still felt incredibly lucky that this man was mine. He retrieved the lubricant from our nightstand, slicking himself as I watched, my mouth going dry at the sight. Then he was covering my body with his, settling between my thighs, and I wrapped my legs around his waist, pulling him closer. "I love you," he said against my lips, positioning himself. "So much, Minso." "Show me," I breathed, and he pushed inside in one slow, steady thrust that had both of us groaning. The feeling of being filled by him, connected to him this way, never got old. I clutched at his shoulders as he began to move, setting a rhythm that was both tender and intense. "Minso," he groaned, his forehead pressed to mine. "You feel incredible. Perfect. Made for me." I couldn't form words, could only hold on to him as pleasure built with each thrust. He adjusted his angle slightly and suddenly he was hitting that spot inside me that made stars burst behind my eyes. "There," I gasped. "Right there, don't stop." "Never," he promised, maintaining that perfect angle, one hand sliding between us to stroke me in time with his thrusts. "I've got you, love. Let go for me." The combination of sensations. Him inside me, his hand on me, his scent surrounding me, his voice rough with desire, pushed me over the edge. I came with a cry that I had to muffle against his shoulder, my body clenching around him as waves of pleasure crashed through me. "That's it," he groaned, his rhythm becoming erratic. "So perfect, so good, Minso." He followed me over with my name on his lips, and I held him through it, feeling him pulse inside me, feeling the warmth of his release. We stayed like that for a long moment, catching our breath, hearts pounding in sync. He was heavy on top of me, but I didn't care. I loved the weight of him, the solid reality of him. Finally, he carefully withdrew and rolled to the side, immediately pulling me against his chest. I curled into him, boneless and satisfied. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, pressing a kiss to my temple. "I wasn't too rough?" "You were perfect," I assured him, tilting my head up to kiss his jaw. "Always perfect." His arms tightened around me. "I don't know what I did to deserve you." "You loved me," I said simply. "You chose to be better. You gave me a family, a home, everything I never dared to dream of." "We gave each other that," he corrected gently. "That day in the warehouse, when you threw yourself in front of that bullet, you saved more than my grandmother's life. You saved mine too." I thought about that scared Omega delivering food, about the split-second decision to be brave, about how one moment had changed everything. "I'd do it again," I said. 1,000 times over, if it meant ending up here with you. He kissed me then, slow and sweet, and I could feel all the love and devotion he had for me in that kiss. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that choice," he murmured against my lips. "I could never regret it," I said. "You're the love of my life, Kang Taehyun. My alpha. My home. And you're mine," he replied. "My brave, beautiful Omega. The other half of my soul." We lay there in comfortable silence, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my back, my head resting over his heart, listening to its steady beat. Outside our door, I could hear the soft sounds of our house settling, our sons sleeping peacefully, our grandmothers resting, our home safe and warm. Everything we'd built together, everything we'd fought for. Do you think our grandmothers will ever stop hinting about more grandchildren? I asked amused. I felt Taehyun's chest shake with silent laughter. Never. They'll probably start as soon as the twins leave for university. That's 20 years away. They're very patient, he said dryly, then his hand slid down to rest on my stomach, warm and possessive. Though I wouldn't be opposed to the idea. Eventually. I tilted my head up to look at him. Eventually? His dark eyes were soft as they met mine. I love our family. But I also love having time just for us. No pressure, no timeline. Just, if it happens, I'd be happy. And if it doesn't, I'm already the luckiest man alive. My heart swelled with love for this man, this fierce, protective alpha who'd learned gentleness, who'd chosen love over violence, who looked at me like I was his entire world. I love you, I whispered. I love you too, he replied, pulling me even closer. Always and forever, my Minso. I closed my eyes, safe in his arms, surrounded by his scent, listening to the quiet sounds of our family sleeping. This was everything. This moment, this love, this life we'd built from one act of courage and one moment of fate. Perfect in every way that mattered. And as I drifted off to sleep, wrapped in my alpha's embrace, I sent a silent thank you to the universe for that night in the warehouse, for the bullet that had brought us together, for the love that had saved us both. Our story had started with danger and fear, but it had bloomed into something beautiful. A love story written in courage and devotion, in family and belonging. A love story with a truly happy ending.